Hey, welcome to the Doc Analyze Anything, the show where science and psychology meets. We analyze any behavior, human behavior, including stopping immediately and standing at the top of an escalator. Presumably, I assume this means while people are still coming up the
and just
escalator
letting
behind
them
you,
crash into.
falling like dominoes behind
Yeah.
you. Has that happened to you?
N- No, but I feel like every time I'm on there with one of the kids, because they're young, I have to like get them moving because there's that jump off at the end. They do a big jump and then they just pause, they stop.
Oh,
Uh
yeah.
I do think though I've seen it more at like the airport where they have like the walking path that moves and
Right.
people act like they're just on a sidewalk over to the side talking or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but there still is usually like two like lanes. Like there's like a
Yeah.
stopping lane and then people who want to walk it. Do you walk those or do you just
Oh
ride them?
yeah. No,
I
I'm
walk
trying to
them.
get to where I'm going. I like
Yeah.
This is not a leisurely, stroll through the damn airport. I want to either get to a place where I put my stuff down or go get my coffee or get to my baggage and get out of there, like depending on the direction I'm going. I'm not there to
Yeah.
hang out.
Last year we had a 6 hour layover in Denver, which it saved us like $1,000 on the flight. So it was totally worth it. But there was like, okay, 4 kids. Uh we gotta do something because I'm not gonna keep buying like arcade games and stuff that they could play. So they ended up just jumping on those and bothering everybody for a good like hour and a half. And I was like, I don't care. I
Yeah.
can't. They gotta stay
Just pre-
entertained. So
just
running
pretend you're
backwards on it. They were like running against it, trying to get on the other side racing. I was like, you know what? You're not my kids for the next hour.
so yeah, yeah. Pretend like you don't know me and I don't care. That
Yeah.
is fine.
Yep. Yeah.
Also, I wouldn't want to do it myself because I feel like I don't have the balance to do it anymore. But have you seen where people get on and so there's like their ass is sitting on each one, it's just spinning them in circles because they're going opposite directions.
No, that's a
That's what
thing.
you. I've seen it like on video, so who knows if it actually works or if someone's used AI to create it. But
They like
you should
sit
have.
on it.
Yeah, you sit on because the handrails are going the opposite directions. If you're sitting on
Oh,
both of them, it spins you around. So you should tell your kids to try that next time.
yeah. I'll watch my kids do it. That's a recipe
Yeah,
for disaster, though. I feel like for
yeah.
me.
Have the older ones do it. Maybe they'll catch themselves.
Hey, you're not where you normally are.
No, it is. We're recording this on the 3rd of July. We're out here trying to have fun, although it is kids' rest time, so it's not really much going on right now. But last year we had fun in our holiday episode. That was going to be the plan again this year, but now I'm a little annoyed because stuff has come out, and I feel like we have to do an episode here that's serious and discusses some major issues rather than actually just having fun and getting to BS around like I wanted to. So I'm a little perturbed. But yes, at least I'm sitting out here. It's only 80 something degrees, not 100 where you are. Uh,
Yeah, I will say I'm in a very, very cold basement in my office. And this is kind of like my new locale as far as recording goes, a more permanent setup, but it is very cold. So I found my flannel from like last week laying on the floor and I grabbed it. But it's
yeah.
like 96 and very humid right now.
We're just gonna call it the cell. They just put you in the cell
The
for
cell,
recording.
yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah,
works.
I was very cold on the drive north because Taylor, being pregnant, is much warmer than she normally is. And so
Mm.
the air was just on full blast the entire drive. And I was sitting there, it's 100 degrees outside, and I'm wishing I had a hoodie in the car with the air on full blast.
Well, that was nice of you to sacrifice. I applaud that effort.
I'm not winning that battle. It's just not happening. Uh,
But what are we talking about today?
all right. Well, as I said, it's the 3rd of July. And so we're here to do the most American thing I can think of on this holiday. This is the official uh federal holiday because the 4th is on a Saturday this year. So we're here to complain about the government, of course.
Hell
Um
yeah. Let's do
I
it.
mean, and it is what they were fighting for 250-ish years ago was the ability to complain and say what wasn't going well and not be arrested or thrown in prison or what have you, although there's no real guarantees. But um, let's just remember, on this 250th anniversary of the day that we declared our independence, that this is probably the most critical, you know, thing that they were fighting for was the ability to call out injustices. And although this won't be the most behavior analytic episode, it is very mental health centric, and so that's why we figured we or felt we had to say something, because I don't think people really understand the implications of what the Department of Justice came out and said recently, and what could happen there. I know that you've had some posts about it. I haven't, just because I wanted to do it, use this venue to really talk about it, and I don't know if we really have the following to get it out there as much as I'd like to, but you got to use the platform you have to get on your soapbox and show out when things aren't going well, or policies are being made that could hurt people, and people may not understand that. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's definitely worth talking about. And like you said, it's so adjacent to what we do. Even though this isn't gonna be like a conceptual rabbit hole or anything like that, I think it's worth mentioning because like you said, I think a lot of people don't kind of understand the like full implications of what the
yeah.
opinion was.
So just remember, we had wanted to have this fun. We wanted to talk about George Washington and his buddies and his farewell party, how much money they spent on booze. It was like I don't know, 50 bottles of booze for 30 of them. It's just ridiculous. We want to talk
Yeah,
about blowing stuff up and fireworks and why that might be reinforcing. And we'll just save it for next year because this is just too important, I think, not to talk about. So
perfect.
I know you know just as much about this topic as I do. So I think we'll let you weigh in just as much. But
Thank
generally,
you.
what
I appreciate
yeah,
that.
I'll finally let you say a couple things. Um, But generally, what we're talking about here is a couple weeks ago, the Department of Justice came out and said that states no longer are required to provide community based care for people with physical, mental, or intellectual disabilities. Um, and I think when you read that and you're not working or living in this world, it doesn't mean much. Like, okay, what is the alternative, and how are they even living in community based care settings at this point? What does that even look like? And so
Hmm.
uh, I think most people are just like shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's not doesn't affect me," and just move on. But even if it doesn't affect you, it likely affects somebody you know, someone you care about, a family member, someone you know or care about, and society as a whole largely. So um, I think before we get too far into what this means directly, it's helpful for people to have a history of where mental health has come in the country, the world generally, and basically how bad it was to get us to the point where we are now and the strides that we've made. And then you can understand why going backwards could be so problematic. I think that makes the most sense to me. And
Yeah, I because a lot of people don't have that context,
no,
and I
like
think
if you just said like, oh well, I assume someone's there making sure everybody's being treated okay. So what's it really
mhm,
matter if it's in the community or somewhere else? You know, so
yeah,
so this will
exactly.
hopefully allow us to explain why a little bit better. It can be such a big deal.
And can I add one point too that from everything I've read so far, that stance is an opinion on the matter. It's got no legal bearing as of yet. Um, but as we all know, that's kind of how these things start. So I think it's
Yeah,
important to speak up about it now before things progress too far the wrong direction.
yeah, and we'll get into it too. But the implications aren't that the laws are changing. There have been Supreme Court rulings, United States Supreme Court rulings that, said, nope, these protections are guaranteed and it's discrimination if you try to go against them. But now the Department of Justice says, we're not going to look into it anymore. We're not investigating. We're not enforcing these because we think that, everybody's either taking it too far or we just disagree with it in general. And so we don't know for sure why they've taken this approach. We can have some educated guesses at the end, but
I've got opinions, but
yeah, and I like to try to stay away from opinions as much as possible in this podcast. But
oh,
what we're
okay.
what well, to an extent, but what we will do, I think, is use evidence of other similar rulings that paint where what might be going on here, and just so people can be more aware of that. And so, um, one more thing before we jump into the history. I know that it often seems like we're trashing or hating on the current administration a lot, or maybe we try not to do it too much because we don't want to turn people off. I think you and I, and especially I personally, disagree with the party politics altogether. And I'm more than happy to call out any political party or group who does something that I think is harmful to people, especially those who are in a vulnerable position in our country.
Mhm.
And so this is not because we would say, hey, you should go with the other side of the party, as much as, hey, look at this shitty thing that's happening out there. We should do something about it individually. I don't want to come across as too partisan because I think everybody is wrong most of the time. So,
I don't wanna be on one side because all sides are awful. I
right.
like
Yeah.
it.
Um, Generally too, if you want, like, we're gonna do a glance over here. We only have an hour. We're gonna put it in the show notes. Minnesota.gov, their Department of Health or I don't know what they call it. Here is the Department of Health and Human Services, but um they put this out there a few years ago, and it's a timeline that you can kind of click through the history of mental health in the world generally. And that's where we got most of this information. There's a lot of different sources that corroborate this, but this was very clean, easy to follow, and a good resource that then everybody else could refer back to if they want to, hear more about it. So
Yeah, it's also word of wording, not the easiest read in the world.
it's not hard to read. It is hard to read because of the content, because
Right.
of what you're reading about how people were treated. Uh, Maybe even put in the show notes if you don't want to hear the details of some of this stuff, where to skip ahead to for this episode, because I'm not going to get into. I say I'm not going to get into the real details. We're going to say some stuff that you're going to be like, "What the hell were they doing?" But I'm not trying to shock and awe anybody here. I'm just trying to let everybody know why, basically, that we have a history of never treating people with special needs, or really any needs, well. um Maybe the last 20, 30 years we've made some progress, but we're still a long way from where we should be, and we definitely don't want to be going backwards. So just maybe don't listen to this one with young kids next to you in the car. I don't know if you why you'd listen to me with children around
Not
regardless,
like
but
not like you normally
yeah.
do.
Yeah, the F-bombs are definitely child friendly most of the time, but not this time. Um, so, according to this information, it goes back as far as ancient Rome, and children with disabilities were basically treated as objects of disdain. Um, and if they were deaf, blind, had an intellectual disability, it was reported back in ancient Rome that parents were. It was normal for parents to throw these children into the Tiber River just so they didn't have to deal with it. Um,
Mhm.
they weren't seen as members of the community or society, or treated as humans in the least. It was just basically baggage that they wanted to be done with. Um, Sometimes the kids were just taken to the woods, left there, and then their feet and ankles were tied so they couldn't follow them back. And as a warning to people that may find them, that no, there's something, according to them, not right here. And so we need to, just, you don't want to take them with you either. Um, and then even in Sparta, uh, abandonment of infants was actually required if there was any, they seemed sickly at all. And so
Mhm.
it wasn't even just oh, we don't want the burden. It was like required in that society to do away with anybody that wouldn't, at least as far as they're concerned, help reproduce to grow their numbers in the strongest or most powerful way possible, and probably either produce more soldiers or become soldiers themselves. Because I know Sparta really had an emphasis on the battles and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think as you go through these bullet points, that theme of separation, closing off, hiding away, even
Yeah,
though some are a lot more shocking that well, they're all shocking, but some are just outright murder by any standard today.
Yeah.
That theme kind of resounds throughout this.
And it sticks around for a very, very long time. Uh, so we just went from like what was Rome and ancient Greece and Sparta, like 1 to 2000 BCE, maybe 500 BCE. I guess I should have actually done the math or like looked that up there, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say you're asking the wrong guy, but we'll fact check it.
Yeah. Let's see, 8th century, so 800 ish, 700.
You're close.
Yeah, it was back there far enough. Um, Nothing really changed until around 400 AD, um, where the idea of infanticide or killing children who they felt were either unwanted or abnormal in some way kind of stopped, and the idea of maybe they said helping the afflicted. I don't think when we go through these we would consider this helping by today's standards by any means, but generally maybe helping them find food or survive at all started coming around that time.
Compared to the act of intentionally leaving them in the
Yeah.
elements. Yeah.
Um, but living conditions were still brutal. Uh, some were able to survive through the help of relatives or handouts from strangers, but for the most part, people either died or barely survived if they had. And we're not just talking about someone who has a severe uh, deficit in language capabilities. There are people that you and I work with who, even as adults, have never learned to speak. But we're talking about people with all levels of disability. This is 787, pretty specific AD. The first institutions for abandoned infants was founded. Um, and it sounds good that, hey, we got these institutions until you find out that the conditions were so poor that the children still rarely survived, like, to adulthood. It just was, hey, at least you have somewhere to go lay down and maybe find some food, but no one's actually taking care of them in this situation. And at the same time, on a lot of town squares in Europe and other places, they had what they called, what translates to idiot cages, where they would put people with special needs out, and they said it was to keep them out of trouble. But most people think there was a good chance that it was for entertainment for the people of the town or area as well. This was also around the same time that people were shipping off their family members who had disabilities, and they would just pay a crew on a ship to take them somewhere else so they didn't have to deal with them. And some of these ships would actually collect people and take them around as like a sideshow and charge people to
Mm.
see them. And then when they stopped bringing in money, then they would just find a port to leave them in and be on their way. Yeah,
These are heavy, man.
I know. And you hate to do it, but I think people need to know too how bad it really was. So 15 to 1600s, then Queen Elizabeth told Parliament to pass some laws to help the poor and disadvantaged. And this was the first time, at least from what I've seen, that it starts to shift some responsibility to the government as a whole. Um, and so it's almshouses, which we don't usually use the term, at least in the United States nowadays, but they're charities to house either the old, infirm, poor, or disabled people, were established. And then workhouses were built for just the poor that were able to physically work. But again, conditions are still terrible, but at least now uh, the government is saying, "We'll do something here to pretend like we're helping," is what it seems more like. It's not like actually helping, but we want it on its face to seem like we're being more caring. So now 1700s, we're getting back into closer to, I don't say closer to modern times, but at least the 250 years ago, closer to where we're looking at, the founding of the United States, at least, because I know we always like to think more highly of ourselves than other places in the world. It wasn't until the 1700s that people figured out that blind and deaf people had the capacity to learn communication, and that they started using other communication systems to teach them language that they always had this capability for, but they were just written off because nobody really knew what was going on there. So then late 1817, early 1800s, Philip Pennell was the first to say, hey, you know what? These people that they refer to as mentally deranged uh, had something like a physical there is something physically happening with them rather than being sinful or immoral, and so maybe we should actually try to help them. It's kind of the birth of the disease model, even though I don't like the idea of the disease model personally because it suggests that there's something physically wrong with people.
Mhm.
At least now we're not saying, "Hey, you were a bad person in another life, and the demons are keeping you like this, and that's what's causing it," or the
Sure.
bad blood, or the changelings, or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so he was such a nice guy. I hope people can get the sarcasm in my voice there, that he decided in the late 1700s, 1793, for the first time, let's remove the chains from some of the people in the asylums and we'll let them roam free. They still can't leave, but at least they're not chained to the wall or the floor anymore.
Mm.
Uh, he did it
Alright.
in one asylum and then it led together another. And shocking that this was just the first time that someone thought to not just keep someone chained
I
up.
was I was gonna say, for those doing the math, this is like 1,000 years after infanticide, so we're
Yeah. Yeah.
we're moving
And
slow.
only a little over, actually, almost exactly 200 years ago was when this guy died. So we're not that far off here at this point at all. Yeah, early 1800s, people who live in poverty were put in the alms houses or poor houses, regardless of the cause or their issues, um, unless their family had the means to keep them hidden from the world. Uh, Mid 1800s saw first schools for children with disabilities. And at first, it seems like they were actually getting decent care and being taught to learn for the first time. And people are realizing that, having what we often refer to as an intellectual delay does not mean that don't have the ability to learn. And I'll throw out that I have rarely, if ever, found someone who, even as an adult, who may not have ever learned to speak, that we can't teach some very, very like strong communicative behavior and
Mhm.
repertoires. Just people tend to think they can't learn and they given up on. But we've had adults who start speaking because we started using other communication systems, having not spoken their entire life. And so
Yeah.
early 1800s, they're like, oh, maybe some kids with disabilities can learn. But the numbers grew so quickly that these schools real quickly just became more asylums and more institutions. And within, I don't know, it doesn't say exactly how long, but I think it was like a decade or so, all of a sudden, now we're just warehousing people again. We're no longer trying to help them and make their lives better.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, then as things shifted again, it had to do with the Civil War. It had to do with money issues in the economy. Um, but views started shifting again in the late 1800s, where people with disabilities were starting to be viewed as suspicious or dangerous. And institutions, instead of helping people survive and learn, changed to now we're protecting society from these individuals. And that lasted quite a long time, with the number of people being institutionalized doubling from just 1890 to 1905. And overcrowding continued in the early 1900s. Maybe I'm the only one, but I kind of feel like post-industrialization 1900s is almost modern day. Like it's not really. We're talking about 100 years or over, but it seems like we should know better by this point, at least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, the looking through, and we'll continue to talk about it, but the change in ethics and how society viewed these situations, uh, evolved, I feel like, very quickly, and almost it wasn't suddenly, but the ramifications of deinstitutionalization are such a stark contrast to everything so far. You know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Like suddenly we're like, hey, maybe this is a bad idea. Then the implications are so much different and shaped. I don't know. We'll get there,
Yeah.
but
And
yeah, it's pretty
maybe
wild.
it's just that, like, I knew my grandparents and great grandparents. My great grandmother, who I grew up around, and she lived until her 90s. I was a teenager when she died. She was born in 1912. And I hate to think about her family just sitting around watching this sort of thing. You know what I mean? I hate to think
Mhm.
of people that I've actually met being around when some of these atrocities were happening. So that might be part of it as well. Um,
Yeah.
but it was around this, late 18, early 1900s that saw the rise in eugenics, and basically the idea that these issues were genetic. And I know people still today have an issue understanding that line between genetics and uh, cultural slash environmental causes for things. And so to really get a better view of it, please go back to that nature versus nurture episode we did pretty early on and just
Mhm.
talk about, or see how we talk about, sure, some things we know are genetic, but there's a lot that it is circumstantial evidence at best. And so to just assume it's a genetic issue and that making sure people can't reproduce either by physical or chemical means really just was attacking people who may or may not, really have passed on any of those issues whatsoever. Um, I know you had not a direct tie, but a interesting tie to this
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Fort Wayne is the location of the state school for state school for feeble-minded youth. It was opened, I think I was reading about it the other day. I think it was opened in 1904. Indiana was the first state to pass eugenics laws, okaying forced sterilization of people that they deemed uh I think the quote is habitual criminals or um, something to do with idiocy, which was a medical term at the time.
Yeah.
But I think it was from like 1930 to like 1975. There was over like 2,000 forced sterilizations of people. It was a requisite if you wanted to be if you wanted to leave, if you didn't want to be there anymore. Um, And what's wild, I watched the documentary. There's a documentary on this place. It's like right down the road from me, which is really wild. I passed a monument. They have like a stone monument outside all the time that has a sign that's very, very kind, considering many of the children died there due to conditions, and there was a lot of unmarked graves, and the local library is still kind of figuring out what the names of these kids were that died there. Um, but there's a story, especially of one guy whose mom was a manic depressive by today's standards, by like today's clinical diagnostic standards, and then his dad was an alcoholic. His mom gave him to this place. He did not have any diagnosable mental health condition. Like I believe he's still alive today. He's pretty old. Uh, but they interviewed him at the time of this documentary, and they were like, he was like, I was 16 and I just wanted to leave. And they're like, well, if you want to leave, you've got to be you've got to be sterilized. So it was like, well, I can live here the rest of my life. And people did live there like 40, 50 years at a time. And he was like, I just went through with the procedure. I just got sterilized and they let me go. And that was just kind of the policy, that they were somehow kind of weeding out this segment of humanity by this practice, which was wildly misinformed, I think would be a good way of describing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And obviously, I don't know. I have had both families and other professionals. One time I was even doing a presentation and someone stood up at the end and like in front of the whole crowd said, like, was shocked. They're like, what, you don't, suggest sterilization for people with,
Yeah, it
and
still
I
comes up
was
today.
I was
Mhm.
shocked at this conference that I'm doing a presentation on teaching, basically safe sex practices to people with disabilities, because I believe it's the whole country, but at least in the state of Michigan, they have the right to engage in those behaviors like anybody else does. So we should teach them how to do so safely and, to prevent unwanted pregnancies and that sort of thing, and to advocate for themselves so they're not taken advantage of. And this person was just mortified that I wasn't saying we should just castrate everyone so they can't reproduce and then you won't have these issues. There was also a court case that I'm putting this in here because I was shocked by what they said, but Buck versus Bell was a
Mhm.
case with a woman who was labeled as feeble-minded. It reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1927, and they used a family tree that it seems as though it was actually fabricated or just inaccurate. but showed 3 generations of what they called feeble-mindedness at the time. And the Chief Justice said, you know, 3 generations is this is in quotes, so I believe it's what he actually said. He declared that 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, and he approved the sterilization procedure.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the later studies showed that she was not feeble-minded at all, and it was quite often being used to control women who the families or society didn't like, you know, their how they're acting, like, probably wanted some independence, maybe even wanted to vote, you know, or a job, you never know. But
Yeah. And not to harp on sterilization, there's a wild episode. I believe we'll link it. I believe it's This American Life. This was a few years ago, and I forget what state they were in, but you could still make a phone call and set up that appointment and make that happen for somebody with very little barriers. They recorded the call. They're like, "Oh yeah, yep, come on in. We'll do that for you." And it's like, yeah, it's pretty. It's not. It's not as far off as what people think it was.
yeah, there's another story. It was earlier than this, but uh journalist named Nellie Bly wanted to go into some of the female institutions, I believe it was the late 1800s, to see
Mhm,
what was going on there because there's all these rumors that women were being sexually assaulted, mistreated, and were being put there by family members because men couldn't control them the way they wanted to, or things of that nature, not because they actually had any issues. And so she found a way to get herself committed so she could report on it from the inside, and then had to find a way to escape to get out of there because once she was in there, they weren't looking to let her out. So I believe it was an episode of the podcast Criminal where I heard about this the first time.
mm,
But yeah, Nellie Bly was, I can't imagine putting myself in that level of harm's way just to say this isn't cool, you know, but
right.
somebody needed to do it. All right. So back to the 1920s, things start to shift back. People are starting to notice again the positive effects of education. Shocking that, you know, look, we actually try to help people and teach them to be independent, and that works. Then in 1948, Albert, I think it's Dutch is how you pronounce this, wrote a photographic expose called "The Shame of the States" about one of the institutions in New York, and got people kind of rolling because this was thought to be one of the better institutions, but care there was just still horrible, and it really kind of started some of the public outcry over some of these institutions over the next decade or so. Um, 1960s or 70s, you know, this sort of thing continued. There was a parents movement, which really made some major steps forward in the idea of like, these are our family members, these are our children. They should be treated with, you know, I don't know if they use the words dignity and respect, but basically they should be treated as children, not as people that are subhuman. Um,
Mhm,
this did kind of, according to this, have a negative impact because it was at kind of infantile ization of all people who with special needs, where they're all treated like children instead of treated like people, and thought
mhm,
of like needing special care and needing protection from the outside world instead of giving them a greater level of freedom. But prior to this, they were still just being thought of as, you know, a burden that needed to be locked away. So I
mhm.
think probably we'd say more positive came from that than negative, even though uh, it did have somewhat of an impact that now today we're trying to steer away from. Um, then 1966, Burton Blatt and Fred Kaplan snuck hidden cameras into institutions to show how bad the conditions were. Published the results. It was I think it was again another picture I think they called it a visual essay, if I'm not incorrect here, but
Okay.
they used a lot of pictures and wrote about the conditions, and it was named A Christmas in Purgatory. And this is probably the most famous one, at least from my knowledge, that really showed there, you know, pictures of Christmas time, people sitting there naked, huddled in corners, hungry, you know, basically looking half starved, as skinny as they had gotten, and being completely ignored and neglected, you know, 20, 30 hours a day locked in a room with no real movement freedom or care whatsoever. Uh, and I believe that is kind of the one that really got the anti-institutionalization movement moving, in the
Mhm.
country generally. Um, it it wasn't until the 60s, the 1970s that there was even a thought of let's try to change the way that we are treating people other than, hey, we should just make these places better, which never worked, even though they had tried that for decades prior.
Right. And and it was Nixon of all people?
I know. Yeah, and according to Nixon, signed an executive order. Uh, it said with the goal of reaffirming the goal of returning one third of the 200,000 institutionalized people back to community settings. So someone had already said we need to do this. He wrote, it did a executive order to try to actually push it forward. The idea was supposed to be we're going to put systems in place to help you live as independently as you can live based on your situation, and maybe try to work on some of these skills to help you get there too.
Hey,
Um,
imagine that.
yeah, it's wild that was an epiphany for some people, you know?
Right.
Um, it was around this time also the US District Court ruled that people with disabilities had a right to treatment in the least restrictive environment. So there's another step away from the institutionalization laws that are being questioned now. Um, 1980s then saw the rise of the person-centered approach, and I figured this would be a good time for us to talk a little bit more about that because that is kind of the system we work in more of this idea that you don't get to just tell people with disability, regardless of what that disability is, how they're going to live and what they need to, what services they need. This person is supposed to be involved in the conversation, front and center, saying what they want, what they need, what their goals and dreams are, and how can we design their program around helping them meet those goals.
Yeah. Yeah, this idea that the person who's receiving services has a say in what services they receive is the idea. And from experience, we know that it's more it's the law, but it's how it's implemented is it varies from like state to state, organization to
You don't have
organization,
to be
even
you don't have to be quite that diplomatic. People bypass this by making it seem like they're doing the process a lot of the time, even today.
yeah, people still get railroaded in these
Yeah,
meetings.
a lot of the time.
However, yes, yeah,
Yeah, the design of it is that you get to choose your services. What we often see is we go in and someone says, "Hey, this is what you need, and this is what you need," and they're like, "Well, this is what I really want," and they're like, "Oh, yep, we'll write that in your goal, but we're still telling you what you need." Um, and it certainly does not need to be that way. When we get called in for, we're talking something as severe as sexual deviant behavior. And we go into that meeting and we might have a court order that says they have to work with us and do what we say, because of the behavior involved. Uh, Often because they've been found not guilty by reason of insanity or something like that, which I find it strange that it's still called that in today's age. But
yeah, 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 yeah,
um, yeah, they go through the NGRI committee, and that is the official term, at least in Michigan. We go in there and we're doing our plan. We're like, all right, cool. But what are your goals? You may not have a choice or view that you are getting this service, this help, but you want to be independent. You want to be out of this locked facility or this locked place where you can't, reach other people. It's not necessarily a facility. It's more of usually a house that just has locked
yeah,
doors.
sure.
Um, all right, then let's teach you the skills and work on the behavior issues so you can reach those goals rather than tell you what your goals should be and assume
Mhm.
that you'll never reach them because that's what happens a lot of the time too. You know, one of the most frustrating situations I've ever been in is when I went into a school consulting for a case. We've been working with this child at home, teaching them to use picture exchange cards to start the most basic level of communication. And then we could build it up from there. And it was successful. They were exchanging cards to ask for the items they wanted. And like step one, but we got that far. And the school had the speech path stand up and say, nope, they'll never be able to learn language. We're not wasting our time with your program. I'm like, but they're already doing it. What do you mean they
Right,
can't learn this when we've already shown it's possible?
right, right.
So it's often fighting against these preconceived notions when we go into these meetings.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
we can get off the soapbox a little bit here, I guess.
We're jaded by the system a little bit. There are some really good things happening, but yeah,
Well,
it's
and the point of this is how much worse it would be, not that we have it perfect, not that it's fixed, not that everything works the way we want it,
yeah.
but there's not, as far as I know, there's never been a institution that worked well, that wasn't full of mistreatment or something bad happening at some, like, point along the way.
And that's where, and I don't know if I'm deviating from your notes at all, but like with the Olmstead decision, which was you know, that decision saying, you know, two women who wanted to leave an institution and they were being told no they can't, that was actually a violation of the ADA. That that was kind of a very pivotal point in which the sentiment in which I think society viewed what rehabilitation looks like with home and community based services being kind of centered that model like, hey, people do have a right as citizens of our country to receive services the way that they like to receive them. So like I think part of even that decision was the individual agrees to be in the community. Like, hey, maybe this person doesn't even want to be part of the community, but if they do, we can certainly figure out a way that we can provide behavioral supports, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all these things to help rehabilitate them in the setting that they choose as opposed to saying, "Hey, you have to be separate from the rest of society."
Yeah, and we'll go, like, a little bit more detail what that was. So, by the '90s, some states already closed all their institutions, and many had reduced their numbers, although we were talking to someone in on one of their other podcasts recently who was talking about, oh, yeah, they shut them all down in their state, but then they just shipped them to all the institutions in Texas if nobody knew
In
how to
the
deal
other
with the
state.
behavior issues.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know that it really fixed the issue, except you just ship somebody out of town then at that point. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, 1999 Olmstead decision by the Supreme Court, uh, and it was two women who had been repeatedly forced into institutions, not because of they were having any major issues, but because they couldn't get or afford the caregiver support that they needed to live independently. Like, all they needed was some help, and they were fine. And that's really where the Supreme Court came in and said, "Listen, we are violating their rights, like, as part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, by saying that these people have to be institutionalized when they don't want to be, and they're not a danger to themselves or society. They just need a little bit of help." And
Mm.
so there are always going to be those outliers, and we work in those outliers, and we can talk about that more specifically than anybody else and how we can still treat those people in a community-based setting. But this was the ruling that now the Department of Justice is trying to come back and say, oh, it's a misinterpretation, or people are taking it too far, or it didn't actually say that you can't institutionalize people or you shouldn't do it, just if, like, they don't want to be, maybe, like, they're trying to bypass this ruling altogether is what it really seems.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I think you're going to talk about it, but like there might be a misunderstanding that they think, or that whoever wrote this, uh that it would somehow save states money, but that's not necessarily true, right? Like that's
I don't know if that's really the feeling or not. I have a feeling that their argument would be, one, there's, we see this big push, at least in the last 5 years, or maybe so, in our country, maybe a little more than this, where, like, anybody that's different is kind of a danger to, the American way of life. People coming from other countries that are dangerous. People with some disabilities are dangerous. And it's back to that again, kind of push where we were. That's the scary part to me, is it's almost like we're going backwards to, like, 80 to 100 years ago, where people are afraid for no reason again. When, sure, you're going to have these a few outliers here and there where people exhibit some dangerous behavior, but it's a very, very small percentage. And so, uh, I think their thought is people are dangerous, maybe out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. But also, yeah, I don't even know if they can argue that it saves money, because there's enough data out there to suggest that it's, like, if you do a quick search, the numbers are something like it's like a quarter of the cost to be in a community based setting or something like that. And so, I don't,
versus inpatient.
That was just a quick Google search because I know that there had been data out there, but I didn't have it in front of me. And yeah,
Yeah.
the general idea was it's about a quarter of the cost compared to institutionalization. So I don't even know if they can argue that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and the scary part is just the like I alluded to earlier, society changed its view for the most part. Not you can't say society and say every individual person,
yeah,
but this idea that society is saying, "Oh wait, this treatment, this separation, this segregation is actually permissible," is scary because it harkens back to all the things that you just talked about. Like how far back are we talking? Like, you know what I mean? Like what does that entail? What do those services entail? Is there a rehabilitative goal? Is it just to keep people separate? Like that's what I'm
and
nervous about.
it is hard to figure out what the purpose is because we know without getting too much into it or trying to seem like we're being just attacking here at this point. There are a lot of civil rights rulings that have been rolled back or attempted to be rolled back recently. And it's not clear, is it because we, think that as the government that the civil rights acts that are available or that have occurred, restrict their power in some way? Is it that we don't like the people that those are meant to protect, or um, it's not clear why that would be, except for, and this is my hypothesis, although again, I can't say for sure because nobody's come out and actually talked about it. But we've also seen a big push for things like the privatization of education. Betsy DeVos, okay, we're going to make a profit off of this and claim that we're teaching kids better.
Yeah.
Privatization of prisons. And now you can make a bunch of money, and the system tends to try to keep people in prison rather than rehabilitate, get them out, and let them rejoin society, even though they've done what society says they're supposed to do. My fear is, even though this is hidden under, okay, this is a misinterpretation of what the ruling was, it really has more to do with, hey, I know some people that can make some money off of this, and so
Hmm.
they can't make the same amount of money by keeping people in a housing type situation. As long as we're providing care, why not, put them in an institution where they can make some money off of it? And like that,
Yeah, and
it's just that fits the
it's
pattern.
yeah, it's speculative at this point, but it's not inconceivable. I think that if there's an opportunity there where a state says, "Hey, we are no longer providing home and community-based services," somebody will jump in at that opportunity. But just because somebody is going to provide the service doesn't mean that the level of care is going to be adequate. You know what I mean? Like and they might not face the scrutiny that home and community based service waiver providers did.
Yeah. And I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this is, we've seen all these, oh, we're cutting costs, we're cutting the fat. Maybe it is that if you get rid of these rules and these laws and you don't have to investigate them anymore, they think that they're saving the system money. And so not they're just finding ways to not have to put money into the protections of people anymore. And it's not necessarily any better, but at least in that way, it's not like purposefully neglectful of people. It's just, oh, money's more
It's
important.
is negligent, is certainly
Yes.
negligent, but when you're the one who makes the rules,
It's
I
it's
don't know. Maybe I'm a little more partisan than you want us to be on this one, but
no, I don't mind being somewhat partisan, but again, the issue is I really don't agree with much of what's gone on with the current administration, but it doesn't mean that I did agree with a lot with like other administrations, and so I don't want to make it sound like I have my views. I'm more than willing to put them out there. I've always said I wish candidates would, rather than joining a party, just put everything out there. Let us read what you believe in, and then we'll agree, like figure out who we agree with most, and that's who I'm going to vote for, rather
yeah,
than
but
going.
you just said we have to read something though, and that cuts off like 80% of us who are
I'm just
voting.
trying to point out that there are things on all sides I'm going to disagree with, and whether my beliefs tend to fall in line more with one or the other doesn't mean that I identify with that party or that group of people.
I
But
agree. I agree, but we gotta find. Sorry, I interrupted you. I'll be cordial. Go ahead.
no, you're good. I just want to be as clear as possible that I'm not trying to say that people are wrong or bad because of leaning one side or the other, as much as these are things that are happening that we shouldn't be allowing to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's look at the individual behavior, not the classification of it, is the bigger thing to me.
Yeah. I joked about not reading, but I do think it's the case that I don't have the stats, but most people are getting their information in the 10-second clips that they're scrolling on Facebook Reels or Instagram stories or TikTok. And we all know there's no oversight on what those look like at all. And so if that's how you're getting your information and it's in these digestible bits that you don't have to exert much response effort for that are reinforcing biases or whatever that you already have, we have to find a candidate. We have to find somebody who's able to get good information in those little bits of information out there. Otherwise, we're back in, like we talked about, idiocracy, which I think is
Yeah,
what we're headed towards.
we could
But that's
be. I
Kyle's soapbox.
maybe I'm a little bit more in this one case, a little less pessimistic than you generally, in that I think if you'd put out bullet points and got rid of the parties so people had to actually look at the individual candidates instead of just, nope, I'm just clicking this box, then people would at least look into generally what people believed in or were going to vote for if they're in power, or try to put into place. But again, can you then, try to stop people from just believing the BS online rather than looking at this actual thing? Who knows? It's
Well, and I think
impossible to know.
about people who voted for the current administration, like it certainly, I mean, I work with lots of families who are, and we don't discuss it outright, but live in parts of the country that would probably be more in tune with that partisan line of thinking as the current administration is. But I'm thinking like certainly most of them wouldn't subscribe to this idea of institutionalization again, given that their family members would be affected by decisions like
Well,
that by the state.
and this is the whole point we're bringing up too, because I think a lot of people don't even know this much later what was so bad about institutions. You know, group homes or living independently with caregivers, there's still going to be abuse and neglect. People are still going to not be treated as well as we'd like. But it was the greater masses that were being treated like that rather than like individual instances here and there. And
It
that's
was
the
almost
big
by it was
difference.
by yeah, it was by design,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
And so if we are saying, regardless of what, the motivation is, because we can't, unless, it becomes more obvious to us, figure out for sure what the motivation is at this point. But regardless, people need to know that if there's, first of all, if there's anyone you care about that they may be treated poor like this, or you could be the one who has a head injury and maybe not so serious that you're not able to function at all, but you need a little bit of help. This isn't even my ending, but that's the slippery slope there to, like, okay, now you're there the rest of your life just because, the system said, hey, this is easier for us. Like, it's not
Right.
better, it's not cheaper, it's easier.
I was gonna say even waste, fraud, and abuse. Like I can have that conversation all day,
Yeah.
and I think that somebody who had disagreed with me politically would land. We would land on very similar agreements in that regard. Because I mean, we've been around. We've seen that in the system. We know what that looks like. We've tried to call it out and report it as it occurs, but we know that's even an uphill battle. Um, but I think this goes deeper than like maybe waste is what they're thinking that um,
It's impossible
mandate
to know.
entails.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
it's
know.
impossible to know. But all right. Anything else you can think of?
I'm thinking how you're gonna bring this one on a positive end.
So we're not even we're gonna pretend like we had the episode I wanted to have, the fun, 4th of July topic. This is too heavy and too real to make light of regardless. So
All right, all
let's
right.
we're gonna let's end this like we did the fun episode I planned. Uh Instead of having to get this information out there to all of you, let's look at the bright side. Um we can't ignore the shitty things that people are trying to do or that are happening around us. We got to try to stand up for them, but on the day to day, try to think about the more positive things. And at least we can remember how far we've come in the treatment of people, even though there might be some actors trying to go back the other way. Always look on the sunny side. Life is too short, so love the one you got because you might get run over, you might get shot. You name it.
Sublime, of course.
Oh, okay.
Come on, man.
Well,
You're talking to a 90s alternative kid.
I know, but
I
I
got
think
them
we
all
needed it
down.
for anybody who listening that didn't know
I didn't know
the.
if you were gonna go Sublime or if you were gonna go Monty Python,
Oh,
Bright Side of Life, but
we've done
either
it too many
way,
times. I've already done it
uh,
twice or three
yeah,
times. So.
we've aged ourselves either way, I think.
And just remember, you could be setting off your fireworks tomorrow. Sitting there, one of the tubes falls over, hits the other one, the entire thing explodes, and that's it. And instead of launching into the air, you're launched to the bottom of the lake or worm food or something like that at that point. So just look at the positive and be careful out there.